Here we are, part 17, Recursive Radicalism. I'm Abe Zucca. This is part 17. Maybe there's a part 18 and the book's over. And then we'll start something new. After that, maybe something on Alexander Dugin, Steve Bannon, maybe something intertwining those two. So here we are, Sovereign Hunger, why populism escalates, why the appetite for stronger leaders grows in weakened systems. Sovereign hunger arises when the people's sense that the state is incapable of defending their material or symbolic existence. Leadership becomes less about policy and more about existential reassurance. Populism escalates where legitimacy collapses. A strong leader is demanded when institutions are no longer believed. Citizens crave a singular figure not out of ideological fanaticism, but out of exhaustion. The desire to outsource political agency to someone who promises to wield it decisively. Sovereign hunger is a diagnostic sign of institutional anemia. When the organs fail, the body seeks a stronger heart. The populace first demands protection, then restoration, and then transformation, and finally retribution. Each unmet desire escalates into the next. Populism expands when the distance between elite priorities and popular suffering become unbearable. The more opaque the ruling class becomes, the more luminous the alternative sovereign appears, regardless of his actual merits. A people deprived of justice longs not for balance but for judgment. The populist sovereign is thus imagined as an agent of reckoning rather than governance. Sovereign hunger thrives on disappointments. Each failure of the existing system increases the desire for a leader unbound by its limitation. A weakened state produces charismatic figures as naturally as a weakened body produces fevers. The people desire not merely competence, but presence. A sovereign who appears to see them, hear them, and speak their grievances aloud. Populism escalates because it is fueled not by ideology, but by humiliation. The experience of being ignored, dismissed, and misrepresented. In eras of fragmentation, the single voice becomes hypnotic. Unity is desired even if it must be imposed. The crowd does not initially seek tyranny. It seeks a sovereign strong enough to end drift. Sovereign hunger intensifies when elites deny its legitimacy. Suppression deepens desire. A nation experiencing internal decline imagines salvation as singular, swift, and personal, embodied in one figure rather than dispersed across institutions. As the system weakens, the sovereign archetype strengthens. Myths fill cracks where trust erodes. Populism accelerates when crisis multiplies faster than procedural politics can respond. Urgency seeks embodiment. The sovereign becomes a vessel for collective longing, projecting both fear and hope upon him simultaneously. When the crowd feels abandoned, it seeks a father. When it feels betrayed, it seeks a judge. When it feels threatened, it seeks a warrior. Thus, the populist sovereign is summoned by unmet needs rather than by political strategy. Sovereign hunger is a prophecy, a nation calling out not for a man, but for the convergence of meaning and power. Populism escalates until either the institutions reform themselves or the sovereign replaces them. And if neither occur, the hunger consumes the system entirely. Mythic politics, the rebel, the defender, the sovereign, the crowd. Political drama as archetypal ritual rather than civic procedure. Politics become mythic when the population no longer experiences events as policy, but as narrative. As the clash of archetypes rather than the negotiation of interests. The rebel personifies rupture. He represents the desire to test through stagnation by force of will, the embodiment of impatience crystallized into political form. The defender personifies continuity. The voice warning the past structures, though flawed, remains the last safeguards against the abyss. The sovereign personifies destiny, the imagined figure who will reconcile conflict, embody justice, and incarnate the will of the people. The crowd personifies chaos and potential. It is simultaneously the engine of change and the abyss into which the change may fall. These archetypes do not represent individuals but forces. They rotate through human actors, wearing them like masks in an ongoing civic ritual. The rebel and the defender define each other. Rebellion is meaningful only where tradition still stands, and tradition becomes visible only when rebellion threatens it. The sovereign requires both. He draws legitimacy from the defender's caution and momentum from the rebel's urgency. The crowd, however, is the true sovereign. Its mood determines whether the defender is heated, the rebel uplifted, or the sovereign anointed. The crowd transforms grievance into myth into mandate. It accepts leaders not because they persuade, but because they symbolize. Mythic politics emerge when rational discourse can no longer articulate the depths of collective emotions. The rebel becomes dangerous when the crowd echoes him. The defender becomes irrelevant when the crowd turns him out. The sovereign becomes tyrant when he ceases to fear the crowd. He becomes martyr when the crowd ceases to believe in him. The crowd becomes monstrous when it believes itself righteous. Innocence combined with injury becomes a force with no limit. A polity fractures when the rebel and defender archetypes no longer speak the same symbolic language. Reconciliation becomes mythically impossible. The sovereign must navigate not policy but narrative. He must choreograph meaning as much as action. The crowd devours nuance. It demands clarity so absolute that subtlety appears treacherous, treasonous. The crowd devours nuance. It demands clarity so absolute that subtlety appears treasonous. Mythic politics removes the boundary between public and sacred. Elections become rituals, debates become liturgy, and policies become commandments. Once politics becomes myth, defeat becomes sacrilege, and compromise becomes sin. The rebel becomes saint or demon depending on whether he aligns with the crowd's hunger. The defender becomes prophet or relic depending on whether the crowd fears collapse or desires transformation. The sovereign becomes a living archetype whose fate mirrors the nation's emotional state. His rise and fall mark the cycles of collective identity. The crowd itself remains unknowable. Its shifts are tidal, its demands contradictory, its loyalties volatile. Mythic politics ends when the crowd becomes entrenched and disenchanted, when symbols lose potency and narratives lose coherence. At that moment, a new archetype cycle begins. New rebels appear, new defenders emerge, new sovereigns are imagined. The system does not collapse, it metamorphoses. The crowd's hunger reset the mythic stage, awaiting a figure who can once again embody its wounded hope. The interplay of rebel, defender, sovereign, and crowd is eternal, a fractal pattern reasserting itself across epochs. Politics without myth is administration. Politics with myth is destiny. And in every age, a nation must choose which form of destiny it is willing to endure. The purge theocracy, the demonic panic, and the ritual excessive righteousness. Beware the zealot, for he will burn down the world to illuminate his certainty. The devil needs no worshippers, only the fear that others may be worshiping him. Every call for purification ends by purifying the purifier. Sacralize enemies and the politics of the demonic attribute. Every polity invents its own demons, but the most dangerous moment arrives when citizens stop recognizing them as metaphors and begin treating their neighbors as literal supernatural antagonists whose mere existence constitutes contamination. Demonology is the most intoxicating form of politics because it converts opposition into metaphysical threat. Once an opponent is reclassified as an agent of the abyss, negotiation becomes heresy and coexistence becomes capitulation. The rhetoric of witchcraft, false gods, and occult elites functions as symbolic short circuits. It dissolves institutional complexity into a mythic battlefield where only absolute solutions, eradications, banishments, expulsions appear adequate. Society begins to drift towards annihilatory fantasies when its political vocabulary borrows too heavily from eschatology, when earthly disagreements are cast as spiritual warfare requiring cosmic resolution. The more a populace fears hidden rituals among the elite, the more it becomes susceptible to performing its own counter-rituals. Symbolic purifications, linguistic exorcisms, and political liturgies designed to break the spell. Demonic attributes thrives where material analysis fails. The less a group can explain its suffering, the more eagerly it assigns supernatural agency to its enemies. To designate an entire class, ethnic, religious, ideological, as demonic, is to abolish the possibility of moral ambiguity. And any politics that abolishes ambiguity inevitably abolishes mercy. Demonological politics always promises catharsis, annihilation, purification, but delivers only escalation. For the logic of spiritual enemy making cannot stop once begun. Every purge uncovers deeper impurity. When a movement claims exclusive access to the sacred, it cannot help but convert dissent into sacrilege, and sacrilege, once named, demands punishment. Theocracy begins not with law, but with narratives, when the political imagination shifts from governance to metaphysical crusades. The executive fantasy and the fetish of absolute solution. Calls for execution, however, later softened, disavowed, classified, or contextualized, reveal a structural desire within certain movements. The fantasy of a world cleansed not by reform but by expulsion, not by persuasion but by elimination. The execution fantasy arises wherever complexity feels intolerable. It is the political equivalent of closing one's eyes and wishing that contradictions would disappear. When violence is denied in principle but embraced in imagination, I'm not advocating for violence, but they must be annihilated. The psyche splits. One part performs moderation while the other dreams of purgation. The most revealing political statements are not those carefully prepared, but those delivered in zeal, improvisation, or anger. The moment when the effective core surfaces and ideology sheds its rhetorical garments, once a movement flirts with punitive absolutism, execution for unbelief, annihilation for impurity, it has already begun the process of constructing a world where judicial restraint is interpreted as moral cowardice. The executive fantasy always claims necessity, not cruelty, but cosmic hygiene, not revenge, but purification, not murder, but justice on behalf of the divine. A political program that publicly disavows violence while privately invoking it becomes dependent on ambiguity, for ambiguity allows both fanaticism and deniability to coexist. The instinct towards elimination intensifies whenever a movement imagines itself in possession of transcendental truths. When one stands with God, all opponents appear as either obstacles or offerings. The symbolic call for annihilation is often more dangerous than literal violence, for symbols cannot be prosecuted and fantasies cannot be regulated. A society can recover from violent acts. It struggles to recover from violent imaginations normalized as legitimate discourse. The cruciform state and the theater of civic theocracy. The proposal to install crucifixes in every school, office, and home reveals the theatrical nature of symbolic authority, the belief that sovereignty can be made visible through icons rather than cultivated through justice. A state that mandates symbols of piety is not strengthening faith, but replacing it. Compulsory sanctification breeds resentment, not reverence. Public religion becomes political religion in moments and symbols are weaponized as proofs of loyalty, used not to elevate the soul, but to adjudicate belonging. The dream of the theocratic America, Christ's country, God's country, arises whenever spiritual insecurity meets political ambition and each seeks validation in the other. The more fragile a movement's theological confidence, the more aggressive it attempts to legislate that confidence onto the public sphere. A cruciform state imagines itself unifying, but its unity is built on exclusion. The cross becomes not a beacon, but a border. Theocratic rhetoric substitutes metaphysical urgency for policy deliberation. Only God is invoked. Arguments collapse into obedience. When a government demands religious uniformity, it shrinks not the diversity of its populace, but the horizons of its imagination. Difference becomes danger. Plurality becomes pollution. A society that confuses national identity with theological submission is preparing itself for a drama of endless ideological inquisitions. The greatest danger of civic theocracy is not authoritarianism, but the hollowing of the sacred. When divine language is conscripted into political violence, both politics and piety are degraded. All right, that's the end of part 7. I'm Abe Zucca. Check out my art at zuccagallery.com. Google the name Abe Zucca. I'll see you guys later.